Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Magpie Circle today when we shine a light on the National League, all things National League, with a man who is very much the non-league guru. I think he's got nearly 50,000 followers on Twitter. A very, very warm welcome to Ollie Bayliss. Delighted to have you back on the show, Ollie.
Thanks, Paul. Always a pleasure to chat to you. Always glad to be on the programme.
Well, I'm hoping you can shine a bit of a light and talk to us a little about what is and isn't going on with the National League, fallout from last year, working party on salary cap, way ahead, battle between the big clubs and the little clubs. Because I think it's fair to say there has been quite a sea change in the National League, and the higher percentage of what you would consider to be established football league clubs, the amount of money that is being spent by some of these former football league clubs, which in many cases actually dwarfed budgets spent by League Two and League One, and how that balances out in the National League, who by definition have to look after clubs who remain part-time and you would think would stay part-time because of size of crowd, size of club. Seems to be a massive imbalance at the minute in terms of the discrepancy between stature of clubs. How, looking into your crystal ball, how big a challenge do you think this is for the National League?
We're certainly at a point, aren't we, where there seems to be some money being spent in the National League. Obviously, Wrexham have been quite a high-profile example of that, and some of the signings they've made over the last few weeks and months, mixed in with the teams that have gone down that seem to be still relatively strong budget-wise. You know, Grimsby's and Southend's, mixed in with Notts Counties and Chesterfields and all those former league sides as well. And then you've kind of got your bigger teams as well in sort of a non-league sense. You know, Dagenham and Redbridge, teams like that, they're going to be strong. Yeah, it's really difficult. It's the only league, isn't it, in the country really that's got that real mix of teams that are full-time and with big budgets and, you know, full-time professionals mixed in with the semi-professional and the part-time teams still. It's a real challenge. And they're looking at the idea of a salary cap. There was an EGM. Actually, it was at the AGM, wasn't it, where it was voted for that the working party be set up and it be looked at to introduce a salary cap to try and make things a little bit more level. It started to be voted through, so it was still a long way, I think, from being finalised, and that'll be considered over next summer to apply for next season. It's really difficult, isn't it? Because we want non-league football to be as strong as possible. We want teams to be as strong as possible in the National League. I think it's good when we see high-profile players play in the National League. We don't necessarily want to, well, I certainly wouldn't want to see too many barriers in place to stop that. But on the other hand, you need to keep some level of competition between teams that can't afford to spend that sort of money. And you need to make sure the league is sustainable as well. You know, you need as many checks and balances in place as possible, really, to make sure clubs aren't overspending and aren't doing what Macclesfield did a couple of years ago, where they, you know, got themselves promoted and went up a level, or, you know, a Bury, and you get promoted, but ultimately you can't afford to maintain that. And you know, we don't want to see clubs go bust.
But I think the real dilemma, as you just said there, for the National League, is some clubs are part-time, some clubs are full-time. In fact, now the vast majority in the main National League division are full-time. There's probably 5 or 6 maybe in total who are, it's not being derogatory, but are semi-professional. Let's refer to it that rather than part-time. How sustainable is the current model when you're now looking at significant number of clubs not only being full-time professional, but having budgets that are actually larger than League Two clubs?
I think it comes back to the two promotion places in some ways, doesn't it? It comes back to that sort of blockage at the top of the non-league game. If you look at League Two, 4 clubs go up, 4 clubs come down from League One. So you've always got this kind of fluctuation. You've always got this room for clubs to grow and move up out of that division. The challenge with the National League, the challenge with non-league is two places, and only one of them is guaranteed. The other is through the lottery of the playoffs. So you end up in this situation where you have bigger side. You know, if 4 teams got promoted every year from the National League, Notts County probably wouldn't be a non-league team at this point, would they? They'd have found their way out of the division.
Yes.
So because we've kind of got this blockage and this sort of dam of that's preventing bigger sides who have bigger budgets and bigger attendances from getting out of non-league and back into the Football League, you end up with these bigger sides that probably play in the National League for 2 or 3 seasons, sometimes longer than they need to or they should. So it's a real challenge, but for me, we don't want to be clipping the wings too much of those teams, because otherwise you end up in this situation where they get promoted, but then they can't maintain that level, or they struggle then in League Two, or you have teams that come down from League Two who are too strong for the National League. What's, I think, quite a source of pride to the National League and to non-league football is that when a team gets promoted out of the National League, they don't come back down again. I don't think that's happened since promotion was properly introduced in the early 90s, that of all the 30 odd teams that have been promoted from the National League into League Two, none of them have come straight back down again. If you compare that to the Championship and the Premier League, where, you know, I'd imagine that percentage is 40, 50, 60% of clubs come straight back down again. That doesn't happen coming out of non-league, because teams, by the time they're able to get promoted, are so strong and well run normally as well, and sizable, that they do all right in the Football League. Perhaps an easier solution, although maybe not so for the EFL, is maybe we introduce 3 promoted teams out of the National League, or 4, and then mean that we don't have this blockage at the top of non-league football.
I mean, I think there's a lot of validity to that. But the reality is, it's turkeys for Christmas. Do you foresee a time where the Football League would acquiesce or agree a formula with the National League for, let us say, 1 additional promotion place?
I think the events of the last year or so haven't helped, and we saw it in Southend's, Macclesfield's appeal, wasn't it? I've skipped a year. Yeah. Macclesfield's sort of appeals last season, their reluctance to get relegated. We've seen clubs make the case that they shouldn't be relegated to the National League because it's starting a season late, or the way it's run, or the uncertainty as to whether a season will play out. I think it was Southend made the argument, didn't they, or briefly made the argument anyway, that they shouldn't be relegated because there was no relegation from the National League last season. So certainly some of the EFL clubs have made an argument about the way the National League has been run in the last couple of years as a reason they shouldn't be relegated. And that's not to say that all 72 clubs in the EFL feel like that, but I think the way things have gone for the National League in the last couple of seasons, where with seasons stopping and teams not playing in Dover, things like that don't help the reputation of the National League, and don't necessarily help this situation where the National League can say to the EFL, actually, we think it's fair that 3 clubs get promoted now. I think that would have to be a case that the FA and the National League would need to make, and I think probably the events over the last couple of years have knocked that back a bit.
Question: do you think there is an appetite and a real willingness for the new chairman and the new chief executive, Mark Ives, or permanent chief executive now, to really lobby and present a compelling case to the Football League that says our top half is every bit as good as the Football League? We're a much bigger organisation. Look at, we have 5-6 clubs averaging over 5,000 fans. Do you think the National League is in a position to at least to start to lobby and present that case to the Football League for an additional place? Or is it they're more a little preoccupied with just making sure we keep every club in the National League North and National League South, inverted commas, still going?
Yeah, I think at the moment it's still firefighting. It's still coming out of this pandemic picture where, last season we had 22 teams that finished the National League season when 24 should or could have started it. I think we're still in that situation really, where they're trying to bring about, I'd imagine, a bit of stability before they make that case. As I said, I think the events of probably the last couple of years have meant that making that case at the moment is probably not ideal. I think the timing of it isn't quite right. I think there is a strong argument to be made. I think the evidence and the way that clubs perform in the National League when they get promoted to League Two, or the way they perform in the FA Cup as well. Last season we saw a lot of National League teams comfortably beat teams in League Two and League One, sometimes in the FA Cup. I think time and time again, when they come up against each other and you see a struggling team in League Two play against a National League team, you almost back the National League team to get results. I think we can see on the pitch that these clubs are really not far apart. Similarly, how often does a team get relegated from League Two and bounce straight back up to League Two after winning the National League? It very rarely happens. I think there's a strong argument there. I just think the timing of it is probably not quite right. I think we're maybe a couple of years away from that point again now.
The flip side to this equation, and I suspect unlikely, but if you are the Football League, what if you take on an extra division and take out the 12 biggest clubs from the National League?
Yeah, and that's something that's been considered a few times, hasn't it? It's been proposed a few times. I don't know how formally, whether it's sort of mixed in sometimes with the B team model and that idea as well, or putting together a sort of a North and South League Two, yes, where you would split that level.
What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know how much
you're North and South with the top end of or however many clubs it's needed in any one particular season from the National League move up.
So say you took 12 sides out of the National League and put them in the Football League, I think you'd then end up with whatever the top level of non-league football, whatever that level would be. You'd then need to move up 12 clubs from the National North, National South. Well, half of those would be full-time, half of those would be part-time, semi-professional. I think you'd still end up with this. I think you'd just sort of kick the can a little bit further down the pyramid. You'd still end up with this mixture of full-time and part-time and sort of hybrid working clubs, some of which would be we've seen Torquay United, clubs like that, recent memory, go down to the 6th tier. You'd still end up with some big teams, your Dulwich Hamlets, your teams like that, that are still big York clubs City. For that level. Yeah, absolutely. I think you'd just sort of move the issue slightly one step down the pyramid. I think what's interesting is how competitive the league. We talk about the clubs without the budgets in National League. Actually, those clubs quite often are doing all right for themselves. You look at the clubs that got promoted last season. Most of them did fine. It's your Barnets and your Dovers and your more established National League clubs were the ones that actually struggled last year. Your part-time semi-professional sides did all right. Kings Lynn first season up, no real problem there for them. You clubs like that seem to be holding their own. Weymouth seem to be doing fine. Clubs seem to be holding their own at the National League level without necessarily having to spend a huge amount of money. So I don't know how much of an issue money, you can't necessarily buy your way out of the division and out of non-league, I don't think.
On money, salary cap. So as I understand it, the National League voted for a working party to prepare a case for a salary cap, or prepare a working framework for a salary cap, report back to the National League Board next summer with a view to a salary cap being put in place for the start of next season. Now, this comes at a time when there has been an explosion in terms of the salaries paid by several clubs, not just one. Everyone focuses on Wrexham, but clearly Stockport have spent a lot of money. We at Notts County, in the first 2 years, would have been one of the biggest 2 or 3 spenders. There are reports of individual players in this league now being on north of a £250,000 annual salary. What are your thoughts on salary cap? Can it be gotten in? Because if the club's with £250,000 on one player, I saw a figure being bandied around of 900,000. That has got to be difficult, to put it mildly. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that figure is absolutely correct. That figure was the sort of recommended figure that was part of the AGM vote. So £900,000 a year at step one, and £540,000 at step two, which I'd imagine fewer clubs are in risk of breaching that at step two. But yeah, less than £1 million in wage budgets over a year would be the situation for the National League. I think interestingly, it's worth pointing out that it was voted for by the clubs at the AGM, but actually the National League board recommended against it. So there was two proposals on the table. There was both that and the introduction of a new independent ethics board as well, both of which the National League board and the chairman recommended that clubs voted against, but clubs didn't. Clubs voted for it, so the working party's been set up and they're going to look at it. For me, salary, I think in the whole of English football, the whole of world football, I think salary caps could be a good idea. I think your problem is if they're not introduced in the leagues above, you end up creating a bigger chasm between divisions. So I think, to all intents and purposes, if we had a salary cap in the Premier League and then in the Championship and League One, League Two, then they're naturally great. The risk of, and it's the same conversations that the EFL have been having, the risk of creating a salary cap in the National League means that you relegate the division to being a second-class division. Players don't want to come and play in non-league because there's a salary cap, so it means they can't earn as much money. The teams at the top of the National League that get promoted to League Two are already at disadvantage because they've got players on lower contracts. They're not spending as much money. They're inherently a smaller club, not splashing the cash before they get promoted. You kind of create this artificial chasm then between the National League and between League Two, I think, if you introduce it, but there's nothing in League Two. Now, of course, it makes clubs live within their means a little bit more. It means that clubs potentially are more financially viable. I think ideally the model you want is based on profit, I think, for me, or based on income, isn't it? It's based on a club's ability to make revenue, and you can put a certain percentage of that towards players' salary, and it forces clubs to live within their means. But how you regulate that, how you enforce that, how you introduce sort of a, it's like the financial fair play model that UEFA try and introduce, but doing that in the National League, asking clubs to work out and declare sponsorship and things like that. Some of these are part-time clubs run by volunteers in a lot of cases. To try and ask a club towards the bottom of the National League South to do all this extra level of accounting is tricky, and paying somebody to oversee it as well, I think, is part of the challenge of it. My worry with a salary cap is, are you clipping the wings or sort of handicapping teams that could spend more money because they've got a bigger fan base and they've got a bigger income? Are you forcing them to spend less money, therefore attract a sort of a lesser quality of player, and therefore you're then sort of diminishing the quality of the league, aren't you? And then that then affects the league's ability to negotiate TV deals and attract crowds, and less fans want to see a lower product of football. And the league has worked very hard to promote itself and to increase the quality, whereas salary cap might go against that.
Do you think it's got an earthly chance of coming in next season?
Well, I think the fact that a majority of clubs voted in favour of it, at least being explored, I think it does. They've changed the voting structure as well. So if you remember all the various votes we had last season, where clubs at step two had very little say. So in the National League North, National League South, they had 4 votes per division. An EGM in August, they voted to change that slightly. So clubs at step two now have more voting power. It's closer in line with the sort of EFL model of voting. And there are new step two board members as well that have been introduced as part of that. So there's more power now in the National League North and South. And if they feel it's to their advantage, I think that £540,000 a year mark is not going to hurt clubs at step two as much. You can see them supporting it, and you can see clubs at the sort of lower reaches of step one supporting it as well, and maybe that's all it'll need. So I think it's got a reasonable chance. Whether then you get into the territory of the PFA and how legal it is another thing, whether that gets challenged from that side of things, because that's something the EFL have come up against, and I think ultimately lost that battle, didn't they, the EFL, or possibly it's still ongoing with the PFA as to whether it's right to limit the earnings of footballers who are not earning a huge amount of money in most cases. If you're a star signing at Wrexham or Notts County, you might expect to be on the bigger money, but it has a knock-on effect as well on what you can afford to pay your backup goalkeeper, doesn't it? And they've got a right to earn a decent living in what is quite a short career at that level. So there's those challenges as well from it, I think.
I think it's fair to say, as you've mentioned earlier in this programme, that there was quite a lot of acrimony, quite fractious relationships between the larger clubs in the National League and the smaller clubs in the rest of the National League pyramid. Jim Parmenter and Dover clearly riled a lot of people, and then he's resigned from the board. The allocation of the monies, which I know you've campaigned long and hard for full disclosure, riled an awful lot of people. There were certain clubs, Boreham Wood being one, who massively benefited in comparison to larger clubs. And clearly we are Notts County. I'm trying to be objective here, and on a purely individual basis, my view would be to support a salary cap. Okay, so this is not big brother, little brother. But I think the huge challenge the National League has, and I fully respect and understand National League North, National League South. For me, the National League National Division is a mile away from National League North and National League South. You know, you are now getting 7-8 clubs averaging 4,000 or 5,000, not 300, not 200. Business models, and indeed the running of a football club, is so far apart between those clubs in National League North, National League South, towards the bottom end, to fully staffed, highly professionalised, historically Football League clubs playing in the National League. And part of me thinks you need to level up, not level down. And I think this is the massive dilemma that the National League has. So I would ask you, as a guru in all of this, where's the National League going to end up? Do you think the new chairman, Mark Ives, are going to heal those rifts or not?
I think already it feels like the temperature of the National League and the clubs has cooled a little bit from where we were last season. I think a huge amount of that is down to the fact that we're back playing football and we're back with big attendances.
People coming in.
So I think there was a lot of time last season where we weren't playing football and people had more time on their hands than normal, mixed in with the frustration about the situation and how things were going. I don't think things were necessarily handled very well in a lot of cases on sort of all sides, actually. And I appreciate that's easy to, stand on the sidelines as we do and comment on it, as opposed to being in the thick of it, I'm sure. I'd like to think things are heading in the right direction. I think there's still those rifts. We saw it in the vote of no confidence over the summer. So there was a vote of no confidence that was proposed in the board and in the chairman. And it got, I think, 17 clubs in the end put their name to it and put it forward. It went to a vote, and the majority of clubs across the three divisions voted that they had no confidence in the chairman and board. Now, more clubs voted that way than didn't. The way that the National League voting works means that all the power is in the hands of clubs at step one or in the National League, or at least it was at that point. So the vote didn't pass. No club in the National League voted against the chairman and the board, whereas the vast majority of clubs in the National League North and South voted against the chairman and the board. And in response to that, the statement that the league put out, I think, sort of further annoyed and frustrated clubs, where they referred to that vote as convincing. That was from Mark Ives, the general manager at that point, said that the outcome of that vote had been convincing in terms of it being voted down. And I know a lot of clubs at that point felt, well, actually, it wasn't convincing. If you've got a majority of your member clubs, no matter how the vote is weighted, if you've got a majority of your member clubs that are telling you they've got no faith in the way this league is run, they've got no faith in the chairman, they've got no faith in the board, actually, that's not a convincing situation to be in, I think. And personally, I think I sort of subscribe to that argument. I think there's a lot of problems and there's a lot of discontent amongst clubs in the North and the South, especially the National League North and South, especially. I think there's a lot of clubs in the National League that are happy that they were able to finish the season. I think step two is a huge amount of frustration both ways, the way the funding ended, the way the funding turned into loans, whoever ultimately was to blame for that, the way the season played out and didn't play out and didn't finish, and clubs weren't able to finish the season. There's a huge amount of frustration there. Now, the further we move away from that, the further we get stuck into a new season, that starts to become a historic, I think, and that starts to get a little bit forgotten in time. But I don't think it's been forgotten yet. You know, there are talks of clubs looking at legal action about looking at the way the money was distributed still, whether they should have got more money, whether they should have got more funding, whether that £11 million that they felt they should have got in from January to March, whether that should have been in grants or not, whether I've had no luck getting hold of the minutes of the meeting so far in freedom of information requests. I know that the clubs are considering what legal action they can take to obtain that, because if that shows they were entitled to grants, and that's £11 million of money that's owed to National League football. The league itself commissioned a report into how that money was divvied up, and then the recommendations of that weren't acted on. Again, that's a frustration of clubs that I don't think it's gone yet. I think the further we get down the line, the further we get into a new season, maybe some of this will be forgotten and feel a bit more historic, and clubs will start focusing on the present. But I think we're a long way away from healing those rifts amongst some clubs and the league yet.
So a new chairman, Brian Barwick resigned, Jack Pearce, long-standing FA vice chairman member, synonymous, I guess, with Bognor Regis, been there an awful long time. Is he an upgrade on Brian Barwick?
I think from what I've heard and from people I've spoken to, he's somebody who knows non-league football, who clearly knows non-league football. He knows what it's about. He's not somebody that's been parachuted down from a higher level to run the National League without experience. He's clearly very experienced in the way things work as well with the FA and the way things are run. So I think broadly, both Jack Pearce and Mark Ives, what I've heard from clubs that have had dealings with both has been largely on the whole positive. Of course, running a league, you're always going to frustrate. They have to set rules, they have to do certain things. You're never going to be universally sort of popular. But I think both so far have been largely pretty well received. Personally, haven't got a huge personal relationship with either. Professionally, I found both to be perfectly pleasant to deal with professionally. So yeah, I hope so. I hope that both going forward will have an easier time than Michael Tatchell and Brian Barwick had in the last year as well. I think ultimately the league is heading in a positive direction. I think in terms of the televisation of games, it's a little bit frustrating that we're now in a position where clubs spent a lot of time and effort on the infrastructure to stream games and make games available for streaming, and now not being able to do that either at 3:00 on a Saturday due to the blackout, but also midweek as well due to the kind of deal I think with BT Sport. I think it's maybe a bit of a shame, and maybe down the line whether we can get to a point where we still have televised games. And I guess it's having your cake and eating it too, isn't it? If you want the money from BT Sport and you want the sort of televised rights, and you want to be able to sell off the televised rights, then you can't also have clubs streaming their own games and charging for them. But if there's a way we can create a hybrid model of those two and allow clubs like Notts County to stream a game on a Tuesday, and have fans pay for that, or if Notts County are on the road on a Tuesday night, I imagine there's quite a big audience who would want to sit at home and pay £10 to watch that stream, who couldn't get to the game. And you're not necessarily taking away from fans going. I think fans are always going to go to a stadium and watch live football if they can, personally, I think. But if there's a way they can follow their team from afar and pay a little bit of money to support them, then I think that's great. And I think it's a shame we've lost the streaming this season. But in answer to your question, I think the early signs feel more positive. I think the early signs feel like we're getting back to a bit of normality with the league and things are heading in a positive direction.
How does the National League board look now?
So the only member that didn't retain his place from last year was the Barnet chairman, Anthony Krianthos, who was voted out. I think we've got a representative from Aldershot Town, haven't we? Stockport and Chesterfield that retained their place from last time. I feel like to an extent it's a little bit like, with no disrespect to local politics, a little bit like local politics or parish councils, where there's probably not a huge amount of people that that want the role. If I'm honest, I think it's probably a little bit like that, isn't it? Where they're not hotly contested places on the board. I think at times people don't necessarily always want the role or want the responsibility or want the grief, to be honest, they've got from over the last year. But as part of the reforms and part of the EGM, they're introducing new members at step 2 and new independent members as well. So the idea is there's going to be a couple of seats on the board that aren't directly affiliated with clubs, because that's always difficult, and that was really difficult with the funding situation, wasn't it? Where you've got members who are obviously have vested interest, and it's not really through their own fault. You're creating this immediate conflict of interest.
Absolutely.
Where clubs, club chairmen are sitting there and signing off the way that the money is being split, and it sounds like they weren't part of. I think, Jim Parmenter at Dover said this, and you'd imagine if he if anyone has an axe to grind, I think with the board and the way it's run, I think he said that they weren't part of the sort of decision making about how it was split, but they sign it off. So you've got this. Whilst sometimes it can be beneficial to have people that are directly involved in non-league football and directly involved in running a club because they understand what clubs are facing. On the other hand, you immediately have this conflict of interest sometimes as well, don't you?
Yeah, I think one of the frustrations, because governing bodies are always, irrespective of top end FIFA, down to National League, Isthmian League, they're to an extent always going to be whipping boys. They're an easy target. One example that I know frustrated Notts County's management and some of the larger clubs was the recommendation to increase the number of substitutes and bring this in line with the Football League. This was voted against by the clubs. So to an extent, I don't blame the league, because it was voted on by the clubs. And clearly, that is a tactical decision by smaller clubs, because they feel they become materially more disadvantaged because they don't have such a big squad as Stockport, Wrexham, Notts County, Chesterfield. We can name exactly those that would have voted for and those that voted it against. Now, I get that from an insular perspective. But my point here is the National League should be about levelling up as the only official feeder league to the Football League. They should level up. It shouldn't be a case of I understand the role of protecting the team that gets 200 fans in National League South. I totally get that. But certainly in the main National League division, this should be about levelling up to create a case to get better TV deals, better media coverage, and to make a proper case to have an additional place. They're probably a million miles off it, but the reality is, in the quality of some of the clubs and the money's being spent, performance levels as football teams, they're not actually that far off it. And then when they make these rules about 5 and 7 subs, you would then get that stereotype of, it's little non-league. That shouldn't we be levelling up, not levelling down? And that substitute rule, isn't that something the league should somehow bring in as part of a remit for the chief executive or whatever? But when you have I would argue, relatively small decisions voted on by clubs in that manner, they're always going to vote for whatever suits them the best. And we should be taking some of that micromanagement away from clubs.
Well, I think the league can't win, because if the league say on the eve of the season we're going with 5 from 7 subs, clubs are going to feel like the the league management are putting something upon them that they in the majority don't agree with. And again, you've got the clubs at step 2 and the smaller clubs feel like the whipping boys, to use your words, don't you? You end up in a situation where I think it would feel like the those that are running the league are backing your Wrexhams and your Chesterfields and your Notts counties and are doing something that gives them an advantage. I think whenever anything like this has any kind of sporting outcome or any impact on the sport itself, I think it probably feels right to ask the clubs. And I agree with you that clubs are going to vote for what is in their interest for this forthcoming season. None of them are really thinking about the sort of, because of course this season's bigger teams may not be next season's bigger teams, and ideally you'd want clubs to vote on this thinking, well, in 5 years this, you know, how this might affect us, and do we think for the sport it's the right decision. You're right, I'm sure that clubs would have voted down because it gives a bit of strength and a bit of an advantage to
my point
teams with bigger squads, doesn't it?
But using just this, don't get hung up on it, but just using this specific instance, this is not something that has to be brought into National League North and South just because it's International League, right? So I'm struggling to understand, if you only want to, why can't you just bring this in for National League, step 1? North and South says the same. Why is there a need for North and South to be voting on something that wouldn't actually affect them? What, for me, any club that is in the main National League, sorry, by main, let's call it step 1, they must have aspirations to be going into the Football League. Why else spend the money to get up to step 1? That has to be your aspiration. And so therefore you need to be levelling up to be able to compete.
I think there are probably some clubs in the National League that are happy with that level and are happy to be competing at that level. I think in any league you're going to see that. Whether they would outly be admitting that, I don't know, because it's quite hard to sell season tickets on the back of we want to finish mid-table. But there are clubs at all levels that are happy with the level they're at.
I disagree. Sutton, go for the synthetic pitch. Totally understand, right? They got promoted as champions, and they were promoted because they deserved to be. Okay, and they found a way to rip up that pitch that was a hugely important part of their budgets and revenues. Good luck to them. Now, I can only think of 2 or 3 clubs. You ain't telling me if Kings Lynn get a fantastic manager, great bunch of players, you know, and we've had Stephen Cleeve on our podcast. You ain't telling me he ain't going to say, "Oh, no, I don't really want to go into the National League. I won't take the step up. I'll stay in the National League." That has to be the ambition, surely. And I think such is football. You know, maybe it would have been a step too far for Chorley a couple of years ago. They had a great run in the Cup. I don't think there's many at all that wouldn't do it.
I think they would already accept the possibility, or I think they would all accept it. I think it's a different argument, a different conversation as to whether they want to spend money on an extra 2 or 3 players' wages to fill an extra couple of places on a bench to have the chance and to try and match up with the EFL. We're talking about earlier, weren't we, about, you know, trying to make the league sustainable and clubs not overstretching themselves. Well,
yeah.
If you introduce a rule where you can name 7 subs and you can play 5 of them, immediately your part-time clubs and your smaller clubs then have to try and bring in some extra players, don't they? I mean, we see it in League 2 where they can't necessarily name 7. You know, I've seen plenty of League 2 games where they can only name 5 or 6 subs, or it's 2 goalkeepers on the bench. Clubs at League 2 struggle to fill those sort of numbers at times. I think they've struggled. They would either spend more money than they need to try and fill a bench, or you'd end up with situations where they're only naming 5 or 6 subs each week because clubs don't have that sort of depth in the squad, especially in a year where COVID cases are meaning that players are missing games as well.
But you can name your youth players. You don't have to play them. They can make the 7 up. Doesn't necessarily cost you any more money. It becomes a decision on your budget as to how you want to allocate your budget.
You can, and you can say the same for clubs at League 2. It doesn't always happen because I think managers quite often like to see youth players playing youth football at a weekend rather than sitting on a bench and not being used. Personally, from a purely sporting point of view, and I don't know what you think, I don't like 5 subs. I think there's a certain narrative to a game of football, and you see a game develop and you see battles develop between a striker and a centre back, or between a winger and a full back, and then being able to change 5 players in a second half disrupts the flow of a game, and it changes that, and it moves that narrative and what's developed. You know, you can, a team that plays a 4-2-3-1, you can change your whole front 4 and change a left back as well at half time. For me it changes the game too much, but maybe that's me being perhaps a little bit sort of backward looking. But from a sporting point of view, I don't like 5 subs.
Yeah, I don't disagree with the points you're making, but that is the way the elite model has gone. Internationals, Premier League, Football League. And it's kind of like the National League says, oh, well, we got to look after part-time clubs as well. We're not doing that. The more you allow a chasm to develop, the more you allow a gulf in professionalism and the way that your league is operated, you're jeopardizing your chance to continue to be part of that pyramid. And personally, I think there is an argument for the National League to go the other way and really rebrand, resell itself. It's got bigger clubs now than it ever has. And that doesn't mean you forget about the other clubs, but the collective benefits from having Notts County, Wrexham, Stockport, Chesterfield in the National League, aggregate gates, gives your marketing, your commercial arms of the National League, or given they can't have those bigger departments, it gives an ambitious chief executive who's not just a processor of forms, gives them an opportunity to deliver better deals, to create, as you mentioned earlier, more creative hybrid television revenue streams that allows streaming. But you've got to kind of move with the main band of football. You can't say, well, actually, we get to the national and we've got to look after our small clubs. I think you've got to bring up, not kind of say, well, we can't do that. Because then all you're ultimately going to do is jeopardize you being the only official feeder league, which clearly there was a danger when we went through the pandemic with that.
Yeah, there was concerns, weren't there, about sort of losing that status. I don't know how real it was or wasn't. But I guess the salary cap kind of flies in the face of trying to do that then, doesn't it? And leveling up the league and increasing the size and the potential spending of clubs and who they can attract. If you're then the only league in English football with a salary cap, that flies in the face of then trying to match up to what the EFL are doing, doesn't it?
Well, I think there are recommendations and guidelines, aren't there? Believe it or not, with League 2, League 1. The Football League, as I understand it, tried to bring in a definitive salary cap during the pandemic for Leagues 1 and 2 and couldn't get it through. But there are nevertheless some guidelines in place. And it's a purely personal view. I doubt they will get any more than some form of advisory, guidelines on some form of salary, because to an extent, the horse hasn't just bolted out the stable. It's 2.5 furlongs down the road now, isn't it, with Wrexham, and Stockport. And to be fair, I would estimate you probably have 5 or 6 clubs, certainly more than 1.5, and probably touching 2 million for a wage bill in the National League. So how on earth you're ever going to get 900 in, I have no idea. No idea.
Yeah, I think it's normally introduced if it is introduced, it's in a sort of a phased way, isn't it? Where I think pre-existing contracts only count as half, I think, something like that. There is, but yes, I see your point, and I think the risk is you see clubs this season and maybe next season gambling to try and get promoted to get out of this division while they can before it comes in. I think there's that concern as well.
The other big challenge. See, I think there is an element of comparison between National League Step 1 going into the Football League and Championship going into the Premier League. The comparison is the big clubs, 10 clubs, whatever they are now, in the National League. It probably only used to be 3 or 4, but because there's now a higher concentration with clubs not coming back down that get promoted. and probably a not dissimilar number in the Championship, they don't want to be in this division. There's 10 clubs that hate being in the Championship because they think they're Premier League. There's probably the best part, certainly 7, 8 clubs in the National League right now who consider themselves Football League clubs. And the last thing on earth they want to be is in the National League. And that, I think, is a massive challenge for the National League. Massive challenge.
But I think and I think the point you're making is accurate. I think there's less examples in League One. There's some examples in League One as well, and League Two.
Yeah, there's a Sunderland. Yeah, you always get a really big.
But no, I think you're spot on. I think there's a lot of clubs that don't like the idea that they're non-league. That these clubs. I'm sure it's the case for Notts County. These clubs with rich Football League history are currently non-league football clubs. They're not in the 92. But the challenge is that's the way English football pyramid works. That's why we were also against the European Super League idea. It's a meritocracy, and if you finish in bottom places in a league, you get relegated, and it's down to these clubs to find a way on a football pitch, isn't it, to get themselves promoted and get themselves out of this league again. But yeah, I agree with you. And in terms of buying into the league itself and the way it's run and the long-term future of the league, you'd expect these clubs not to have much of an interest in the shape of the National League in 3 or 5 years' time. Notts County, I imagine, shouldn't, and you understand it, shouldn't and don't really care about the shape of the National League in 10 years' time, what it looks like in terms of branding and sponsorship and the way it's run, because they very much hope there'll be a Football League team by that point. And the same with sort of 6 or 7 clubs in the National League. They are unlikely to buy into the long-term future of the league and non-league football because they don't want to be part of it. Yeah, I agree with you. It is a challenge from that point of view.
I don't necessarily have an answer, but I think that goes away to explaining some of the huge challenges and differences between the larger clubs and the smaller clubs. And for all those clubs in National League North and South who may be watching this as a result of your 50,000 followers, this is not Notts County, this is not Chesterfield, this is not Wrexham saying we shouldn't be in the National League. Notts County should be in the National League because they got relegated out of the Football League because we were a disgrace. And I'm sure Chesterfield would say the same. It was a long time ago that Wrexham dropped out. And ultimately, Notts haven't deserved to go back into the Football League yet because you start the season knowing there's one automatic and you've got to win the playoffs. Notts haven't been able to do that. Wrexham haven't been able to do that for 14 years. That's why they're still here. So there's no complaint about that. But I think, let's be honest, it's massively difficult to get promoted back out the way the structure is at the minute. And for me, the National League should be protecting all those clubs that it's got. That's a huge part of its remit. But it's got to be looking up the pyramid, not kind of trying to protect it. So, well, we can't do that. We're part-time, so we can never do more than that. It's got to be promoting and presenting a professional case and have professional people and not having some geezer that's run a non-league club, in inverted commas, for 27 years, right, telling a Notts County, a Wrexham, a Stockport, Chesterfield how this league should be run, when those bigger clubs will be saying, well, hang on a minute, we've got professional full-time staffs. We think we can help, whatever. And that, I think, is the huge discrepancy at the minute, because the way things are going, in another 2 or 3 years' time, I can see within 5 years, every single club in the National League Step 1 is a full-time professional outfit.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's getting close.
And that's what National League's got to move with the times, not the other way. We need to protect. I don't want to pick names out because it's disingenuous and it's disrespectful. But there will be smaller clubs in North and South with 200 fans. Okay, yes, they must be looked after. But for me, the National League is the 5th division, and it's got to start acting with a bit more professionalism.
From my point of view, it would be helpful if there was more transparency in it, and there was more.
That's part of it.
There was more openness. If you look back to the pandemic and testing, for example, so the Premier League started routinely testing, and it would publish the detail. It wouldn't name names, but it would publish the details of we've conducted 2,000 tests this week. So and so, 5 were positive. EFL did that. National League started routine testing, but that doesn't happen. There's they're not publishing those results, and there's at the moment it feels like it's really murky as to how many clubs get relegated from the National League North and South, and that's a situation for me that wouldn't be happening in the Championship or League One. You'd never go into the start of the season not knowing how many teams are supposed to get relegated from League One. But we've got that in the National League North and South. The National League have put out a statement saying it's 3 combined between the 2 levels, like it was supposed to be last season. The FA have said it's 3 from each league. And you've got the chairman of the Northern Premier League who sits on the Alliance Committee saying it's the bottom 1 team. Well, which is it? I've asked the FA, I've asked the National League, which is it? They won't give me a straight answer. Sometimes getting straight answers to straight questions like, we've started a football league season. How many teams are going to get relegated from this league? Or how many teams are supposed to get relegated in the rules from this league even? It doesn't feel too much to ask to get that back. And for me, I think that's important. I would like to see, and it was quite often a criticism of Brian Barwick and the old regime, to be honest, how often were they on TalkSport? How often were they engaging with the media? How many interviews did they give? The EFL do it a lot. The EFL chairman, you'll hear from a lot in the national media, and less so the Premier League. But use those voices for me, and I'm biased because I'm part of the media, I guess. But the league should be promoting itself better, in my opinion, within the media. I want to see Mark Ives speak more on on the radio and on TV, and their invitations have been there. Some of the invitations have come from me. They've come from my colleagues, and he has done some interviews. Some interviews were done over the summer, but there's not been a huge amount since then. I'd like to see him and Jack Pearce speak more and promote the league and talk about the great clubs that are in the National League. You're right. I think it's the best product they've had for years in terms of the interest and the teams that are in there and those former Football League sides and the story around Wrexham and the underdogs, the smaller sides, the Boreham Wood punching above their weight. We've got some great stories, some great narratives in the National League. I'd like to see it sold more.
And that's just very accurately enunciated. A stream of a department that the National League needs to not just up its game a bit, but up its game massively. If the National League are not in negotiations with BT Sport right now, trying to do another TV deal and trying to approach God knows how many other networks, they're never going to be in a stronger position. Wrexham Story this year, Southend, Notts County, these clubs are all getting 5,000-6,000 people. That's a great product. That's a totally different product to 4 years ago in the National League. But
yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree with you. I think
anyway,
it's a great product.
Right. Thank you for your time. But before you go, you're going to have to upset a few people now. It's time for Ollie's tips. You've got a bit of benefit, really, because you've seen a few games when we've done all this before, and we had to do it before a ball was kicked. So who's your thought? We're not going to ask you for relegation because that's unfair. But we're going to ask you, just so you can prepare yourself, we're going to ask you for your tips to go up into the Football League. We're going to ask you for your tips from National League North and South, who's going to join the main division. And then given your huge knowledge, who's going to be coming into the National League North and South, who we sincerely hope that we, Notts County, don't have to worry about the composition of the National League next year, but we may have to. So it'd be interesting to know, who out there, who's the really big spenders in non-league, who are the ones to be looking out for. We know York have got a new ground. Dorking, I think, have splashed a bit of cash. So just very quickly run us through the runners and riders. So who's going up?
Go on then. Shall I do National League up to League 2 first then? Go on. Shall I?
Yeah, go on then.
I'm going to say... You're looking at me and hoping I say Notts County, aren't you? Go on then. I'll do Chesterfield and Notts County. Wrexham to miss out. Just go on. I'll do those two.
Chesterfild and Notts County.
Notts County through the playoffs finally.
We're going to sensationalise these on our Twitter feeds, so you won't get battered.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's Chesterfield and Notts to go up. National League North to come up. National League South.
York City, who have been knocking on the door for quite a while in the north, and I'm going to go. Yeah, go on. I'll go Dorking Wanderers, who have been there and thereabouts, and last season in the south. I think you've got a few good strong sides in both those levels. But yeah, go on. I'll go for those two as automatic.
And just so we know, Dorking have kind of been spending quite a bit of money, correct? And are they full time yet or not?
Dorking are a great story in terms of Mark White, who's one of these sort of great characters in non-league football, but who's both chairman and manager of the football club, who's taken them, I think, in 10, 12 years from sort of park football, effectively, sort of up the ladder. I don't know, 6, 7 promotion, up the sort of living the sort of football manager dream, really, of going up through the levels and through the divisions. Both as chairman and manager. Incredible story, really, and what they've achieved at Dorking Wanderers. One of the ones that was sort of actively fighting against the end of the season with Gloucester City as well, who were top of the league last season. They may well go well. Dulwich Hamlet as well, actually, you'd expect to do well again.
Okay, but you've gone for
York, those probably the 4 then to go up.
So I was going to say, so York, Dorking, who else did you say?
York, Dorking, Dulwich Hamlet and Gloucester City then, if you want 4. I mean, I'm very much picking the sort of the stronger teams from last season and expecting them to
so
their performances.
A little bit, given your huge knowledge, because there are actually, if we remember this, teams from outside this pyramid that used to be in the Football League. Darlington, I think, would be one. So who is going to come into North and South?
South Shields are a team that are very strong, that have been knocking on the door for quite a while.
Weren't they one of the ones protesting and trying to appeal the division? Is it Graham Fenton, the manager? Oh, I think they've got an ex-league player, haven't they? They've spent a bit of money. I know.
They've certainly got a bit of money. I have to admit, I couldn't tell you. They were the ones that took the FA to court 2 years ago with the null and void decision.
That's it.
They're a strong team. FC United of Manchester as well are a team that are sort of big team for that level. Hornchurch as well, who had that fantastic FA Trophy journey, seemed to be sort of big.
They knocked us out. Thanks for reminding us.
But I expect them to do well. And then even further down the pyramid, you've got Jersey Bulls that are doing fantastically, based on the island of Jersey, that have bounced up from step 6 to step 5 without losing a game. They've given a good account of themselves as well in the FA Cup. They're still in the FA Cup. They're a team you'd expect to go up a few levels in the next few years.
Don't they have to pay for the away transport when teams?
Yeah, that's right. They have to fly their opponents out. Fantastic story. I mean, you've got teams like Guernsey. We've got a few sort of island teams playing non-league football, which I think is always brilliant and adds to something. And they're always regionalised based on where the airport is that they fly into. Because there's a few anomalies where you think, well, why are they in that? Why are they in a London division when they're, off the south coast? And it's because that's where they fly in and out of. So that makes most sense. Jersey Bulls, I think we'll see move up the pyramid in the next couple of years.
I mean, we remember Darlington as an established football club. Where are they now in the pyramid?
Darlington I think I'm right in saying this. I think they're step 3 side. I think the newly formed Darlington. He says, quickly checking that. No, they're not. They're a National League North side. Sorry, Darlington fans.
Yeah. You've mentioned Jersey Bulls. Are there any other clubs a bit like Jersey, a bit down the pyramid, where there are huge amounts of cash being spent? I remember, was it Glenn Tamplin? He had all the inverted commas lower league Galacticos at. Was that Billericay?
Well, it's Billericay, and then at Romford as well. Yeah, and then at Romford.
So how are they going?
For a few months. Romford are. I think he's no longer connected with Romford.
Okay.
I think I'm right in saying. I think they're doing okay. I think this season, but I don't think they're not spending huge amount of money. Hashtag United are an interesting one. So Hashtag United are we're effectively an esports team that. In a YouTube channel that played a bit of sort of charity one-off games and exhibition games, and then entered the Football League or the National League system as a full step 6 side, and have been promoted up 2 divisions so far. They're in step 4 now and doing really well. Got a massive fan base. and are attracting, you know, a really young audience as well to non-league football, which I think is a good thing. I think they've, you know, maybe ruffled a few feathers of the sort of more historically looking non-league fan who, you know, sort of slightly more conservative with the small c and prefers the, you know, the history and the heritage of non-league football. And you've got this sort of this newly formed YouTube side, but they're doing really well. They're a good, strong side. It's how far up the sort of ladder they can go. I don't know. It remains to be seen. But they're, you know, a couple of years into their journey and they're doing really well. FC Romania, another one potentially to watch as well. They've got a bit of money. I think they're spending a bit this season. They were a side that, a bit like Dorking Wanderers, were formed a few years ago, sort of on Sunday League pitches, Saturday football, came up through the pyramid, won a load of promotions from sort of Hackney Marshes, now into the fourth tier of non-league football in Step 4 in the Southern League Division 1 Central. They got a bit of money about them this season and may well progress up the ladder as well.
I'll tell you one that did impress me. National League North. You've already gone for York, haven't you? I forget who else. Boston United. They've got a look there. We Notts played one of their very first games at their new stadium, which is kind of out of town. After all those years, they finally moved out of York Street, just off the ring road going around Boston. When you go to the seaside resort of sunny Skeggy, and the new stadium, it's actually a very nice setup there, and they've got a massive footprint. And I think if they can get that right, because they get good crowds. Historically, 20 years ago, they were one of the biggest non-league clubs, weren't they? Them, Kettering, that's before your time. But historically, they were kind of a really big non-league club with quite a big identity.
Yeah. I think I've been to Kettering, but I went to Kettering. I think it was one of those trips as sort of like a 5 or a 6 year old that I'm not totally sure where I went or where it was, but I'm pretty sure I visited Kettering in their sort of their Conference League heyday back then and enjoyed my experience. Yeah, there's a lot of big clubs in non-league football that if you get the sort of running of things right off the pitch and you know the fan base is there, can bounce up through the leagues and have the potential to do so, which I think keeps things interesting, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, you are the fountain of all knowledge. Thank you ever so much for your time today, Ollie, as always. You're delighted if you're upset if you with your predictions. Your insight into the machinations of the National League is invaluable. Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure we will get you back on later in the season. Thank you for taking the time to chat to all us Notts fans. And indeed, with your retweet of this show, I'm sure there will be thousands of non-league followers dialing in and watching as well. So thank you very, very much indeed. Hope you've enjoyed the chat. And we look forward to catching up again soon.
Thank you. Always a pleasure. Always enjoy it.